Azerbaijan recently hosted a grandiose climate summit. What difficulties did you encounter, and what were the main results of this summit?
The primary difficulty was associated with the fact that we had limited time. Countries are usually allowed 2 years to prepare. In our case, it was 11 months. This was because just 2 to 3 days before the decision was made last December, Armenia was blocking Azerbaijan's candidacy. Since there was no consensus, the question of whether COP29 would be held in Baku was to be decided in the last days. So, we only had 11 months to prepare. And that was the biggest difficulty. We had to create space so that we could host more than 70,000 people. There were 76,000 registered participants. We also had to accommodate them, recertify the hotel facilities, because we do not have a hotel infrastructure for such a large number of visitors, and determine the location of their accommodation. For this purpose, different recreation areas were identified, along with finished but not yet commissioned housing facilities. These had to be brought into compliance with hotel standards. It was a huge organizational effort, but we coped with it with dignity. As far as I know, there were 10 complaints about the organization during the entire period of the conference, but they were immediately and promptly resolved. So, as they say, the guests were all satisfied. The second difficulty, if we can call it a difficulty, rather a certain discomfort, was about the absolutely unmotivated feeling of aggression, anger mixed with envy, and some kind of rejection of Azerbaijan. How is it that such a country was suddenly awarded such a conference? They started to call us a petrostate in various Western media, although there is nothing bad about it. Speaking at the opening ceremony, I said that if we were described as a petrostate in the 19th century, when we supplied more than 50% of the world's oil, it would have been normal, but not today, when the fake news of a country that produces almost 1 billion tons of oil, I mean the United States, as opposed to our 30 million, describes us as a petrostate.
30?
Yes, our oil production is around 30 million in total. When the neighbor of this country, I mean Canada, produces 10 times more oil than we do, and describes us as a petrostate, it is unfair. But a group of such fake news outlets, by the way, this is not my expression. I borrowed it from President Trump, and I like it very much. I think it is very concise and very targeted. The lying four, as we call them, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Figaro, and Le Monde. This lying four, together with the State Department auditors, in the form of various non-governmental organizations, have unleashed a smear campaign, a campaign of daily attacks on us. Every day, there were at least a couple dozen articles. This did not cause us any difficulties. It simply caused a feeling of disgust and revulsion. And of course, it was difficult to achieve a result, because we are not a global actor in this area. Azerbaijan's share in global gas emissions is 0.1%, while the US accounts for 12%, and the European Union has more than.
And even that they underestimate.
They underestimate even that, yes.
They underestimate it several times. This is a separate topic.
I am simply quoting the figures that are supposedly official. Therefore, we used all our diplomatic experience, and first of all, the experience of presiding over the non-aligned movement. There are 120 countries there after all, and the experience of active membership in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in building bridges and achieving results. It was not easy, but we call this conference the Baku Breakthrough for a reason. We managed to agree on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which had been discussed since 2015. In other words, the issue of carbon markets was not agreed upon for almost 10 years. Here in Baku, we achieved this, and it became functional. This will allow countries the opportunity to sell quotas, and thus try to keep global emissions within the desired limits. The second point some considered a failure, but I see it as a success, is that we managed to agree the amount of annual spending on climate issues. This is an amount of $300 billion. The request was for $1 trillion, but it was obvious that no one was ready to give $1 trillion. If we proceed from the fact that the previous agreed amount was $100 billion, and here it was $300 billion, it is certainly hard to call this a failure, and much more. A total of 14 initiatives were put forward by Azerbaijan. The vast majority of countries joined these initiatives, with the exception of countries such as France and Luxembourg. Well, it is clear why Luxembourg follows France is probably also clear. So, this is how I would describe this conference. And of course, 197 countries, 80 heads of state and government, 76,000 registered participants. And this is against the backdrop of boycott attempts. It was the presentation of our country.